Hello and welcome to the Vital Redpill. Today we shall read an article written by Tim Foyle on the 6th of March 2021 on the psychology of the conspiracy denier, a closer look at the class that mocks. The key concepts can be summed up as follows. Humans on Earth are born without any memories. We are like an empty book. We spend all our childhood filling empty pages trying to comprehend the world we inhabit. Ideally, it should look like this. As a baby, the most trusted source of information are our parents. When we are in our teens, we will have our coming-of-age ritual. The goal of that ritual is to show us that there's more in our life, move us towards higher ideals. Ideals that have stood the test of time, traditions that give us directions in life, that encourage behaviors that benefit the society. For example, the most famous ones are the protection of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as stated in the US Declaration of Independence. Ideals so strong that they were worth going to war for. Ideals cannot be corrupted, no matter how many people believe in them. But the same cannot be said for humans, as power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Okay. The cutting the ties to the family aspect is that the individual learns, to use simple words, hey, you are not a baby anymore. You don't have to depend on your family for everything. You are resourced and powerful enough to survive without your parents. You are an adult now. The lack of this separation can cause the so-called mummy boys effect. Men who, despite being physically mature, still behave towards their mothers as if they were babies. Or the female equivalent of the daddy's little princess. Many such cases. In the current year, the overall situation looks like this. The baby still learns most from the parents. But the child spends so much time in school and in front of a TV that over time another, more foreign set of values is imprinted on the young formable mind. There are no coming-of-age rituals anymore and no time-proven higher and universal ideals. The role of the parents is slowly replaced by the almighty government and or big global institutions. They know everything. They protect you from every danger. They are your final new parents. And any those who insult your parents or even imply they might not be as almighty as they are, well, those people are stupid and they smell like poop. Evidence for real conspiracies are legion. Politicians lie every day, everywhere. Big corporations do the most immoral things for the supposed sake of profit. Wars are started and decades later nobody even remembers why. The conspiracy denier ignores all this, as all that would damage the image of their parents. A psychological defense mechanism kicks in to protect that worldview at all costs, as a child without his parents cannot survive. Thus, for some, it is really a question of life and death. Then there are those who were not convinced that the government or big institutions are their new parents. From those type of people, most tend to get lost in adulthood. Without general high ideals, they stumble through the world looking for havens of stability. Some then find stability in abusive partners, partners that hurt them, but partners they cannot live without, as a child cannot live without its parents. Others get caught in personality-driven, shady multi-level marketing schemes. And others land directly in the webs of evil cults. You get the idea. The ones who profit from all that confusion are the 1% of the whole human population. Sociopaths. The sociopath never had any higher ideals to begin with, as they only engage in service to self. They cannot even understand why we normal people do things as we do. Why do we torture ourselves all the time for the sake of others? As the only thing that matters to them are they themselves. For the sociopath, all gods are dead, as the only thing in heaven is he himself. Okay, enough preface. Now let's begin with the main text. On the psychology of the conspiracy denier, written by Tim Foyle on March the 6th, 2021, for the website Reporting for Beauty, original link in the description. Why is it that otherwise perfectly intelligent, thoughtful and rational-minded people balk at the suggestion that sociopaths are conspiring to manipulate and deceive them? And why will they defend this ill-founded position with such vehemence? History catalogues the manipulations of liars, thieves, bullies and narcissists, and their devastating effects. In modern times too, evidence of corruption and extraordinary deceptions abound. We know, without question, that politicians lie and hide their connections, and that corporations routinely display utter contempt for moral norms, that corruption surrounds us. We know that revolving door between the corporate and political sphere. The lobbying system, corrupt regulators, and the media and judiciary mean that wrongdoing is practically never brought to any semblance of genuine justice. We know that the press makes noise about these matters occasionally, but never pursues them with true vigor. We know that in the intelligences and law enforcement's wrongdoing on a breathtaking scale is commonplace, and that, again, justice is never forthcoming. We know that governments repeatedly ignore or trample on these rights of the people and actively abuse and mistreat the people. None of this is controversial. So, exactly what is it that conspiracy deniers refuse to acknowledge with such fervor, righteousness, and condensation? Why, against all the evidence, do they sneeringly and contemptuously defend the crumbling illusion that the great and the good are up there somewhere, have everything in hand, and have only our best interests at heart, and are scrupulous, wise, and sincere? That the press serves the people and truth, rather than the crooks? That injustice after injustice results from mistakes and oversights, and never from that dread word conspiracy? What reasonable person would continue to inhabit such a fantasy world? The point of disagreement here is only on the matter of scale. Someone who is genuinely curious about the plans of powerful sociopaths won't limit the scope of their curiosity to, for example, one corporation or one nation. Why would they? Such a person assumes that the same patterns on display locally are likely to be found all the way up the power food chain. But the conspiracy denier insists this is preposterous. Why? It is painfully obvious that the pyramidal societal and legal structures that humanity has allowed to develop are exactly the kind of dominance hierarchies that undoubtedly favor the sociopath. A human being operating with a normal and healthy cooperative mindset has little inclination to take part in the combat necessary to climb a corporate or political ladder. So, what do conspiracy deniers imagine the 70 million or more sociopaths in the world do all day? Born into a game in which all the wealth and power are at the top of the pyramid, while the most effective attributes for winning are ruthlessness and immorality? Have they never played Monopoly? Sociopaths do not choose their worldview consciously, and are simply unable to comprehend why normal people would put themselves at such an incredible disadvantage by limiting themselves with conscientiousness and empathy, which are as beyond the understanding of the sociopaths as a world without them are to the humane being. All the sociopath needs to win in the game is lie publicly, whilst conspiring privately. What could be simpler? In 2021, to continue to imagine that the world we inhabit is not largely driven by this dynamic accounts to reckless naivety bordering on insanity. Where does such an inadvertently destructive impulse originate? An infant child places an innate trust in those it finds itself with, a trust which is, for the most part, essentially justified. The infant could not survive otherwise. In a sane and healthy society, this deep instinct would evolve as the psyche developed. As self-awareness, their cognitive and reasoning abilities and skepticism evolved in the individual, this innate trust impulse would continue to be understood as a central need of the psyche. Shared belief system would exist to consciously evolve and develop this childish impulse in order to place this faith somewhere consciously, in values and belief of lasting meaning and worth to the society, the individual, or, ideally, both. Reverence and respect for tradition, natural forces, ancestors, for reason, truth, beauty, liberty, the innate value of life, or the initiating spirit of all things, might all be considered valid resting places in which to consciously place our trust and faith, as well as those derived from more formalized belief systems. Regardless of the path taken to evolve and develop a personal faith, it is the bringing of one's own consciousness and cognition to this innate impulse that is relevant here. I believe this is a profound responsibility to develop and cultivate a mature faith, which many are, understandably, unaware of. What occurs when there is a childish need within us which has never evolved beyond its original survival function of trusting those in our environment who are simply the most powerful, the most present and active? When we have never truly explored our own psyches and deeply interrogated what we truly believe and why? When our motivation for trusting anything or anyone goes unchallenged? When philosophy is left to the philosophers? I suggest the answer is simple, and that the evidence of this phenomenon and the havoc it is wreaking is all around us. The innate impulse to trust the mother never evolves, never encounters and never engages with its counterbalance of reason or mature faith, and remains forever on its default infant setting. While the immature psyche no longer depends on parents for its well-being, the powerful and motivating core tenet I have described remains intact, unchallenged, unconsidered, and underdeveloped. And in a world in which stability and security are distant memories, these survival instincts, rather than being well-owned, considered, relevant, discerning and up-to-date, remain, quite literally, those of a baby. Trust is placed in the biggest, loudest, most present and undeniable force around, because instinct decrees that survival depends on it. And in this great world nursery, the most omnipresent force is the network of institutions which consistently project an unearned image of power, calm, expertise, concern, and stability. In my view, this is how conspiracy deniers are able to cling to and aggressively defend the utterly illogical fantasy that somehow, above a certain undefined level of the societal hierarchy, corruption, deceit, malevolence, and narcissism mysteriously evaporate. That contrary to the maxim, the more power a person has, the more integrity they will inevitably exhibit. These poor deluded souls essentially believe that where personal experience and prior knowledge cannot fill in the gaps in their worldview, in short, where there's a barred door, mommy and daddy are behind it, working out the best to ensure that their little precious will be comfortable, happy, and safe forever. This is the core comforting illusion at the root of the conspiracy denier's mindset, the deceptive foundation upon which they build upon a towering castle of justification from which to pomposely jeer and mock those who see otherwise. This explains why it is that the conspiracy denier will attack any suggestion that the caregiving archetype is no longer present, that sociopaths are behind the barrier door who hold us in utter contempt or disregard us completely. The conspiracy denier will attack any such suggestion as viciously as if their survival depended on it, which, in a way, within the makeup of their unconscious and precarious psyche, it does. Their sense of well-being, of security, of comfort, even of a future at all, is completely and completely unconsciously invested in this fantasy. The infant has never matured, and because they are not conscious of this, other than as a deep attachment to their personal security, they will fiercely attack any threat to this unconscious and central aspect of their worldview. The tediously common refrain from the conspiracy denier is, there couldn't be a conspiracy that big. The simple retort to such a self-professed expert on conspiracies is obvious. How big? The biggest medical corporations in the world can go for decades treating the settling of court cases as mere business expenses. For crimes ranging from the suppressing of adverse test events to multiple murders resulting from undeclared testing to colossal environmental crimes. Governments perform the wild and most unthinkable experiments, actually crimes, on their own people without consequence. Politicians habitually lie to our faces without consequence. And on and on. At what point exactly does a conspiracy become so big that they just couldn't get away with it? And why? I suggest it's at the point where the cognitive ability of the conspiracy deniers falters and their unconscious survival instinct kicks in. The point at which the intellect becomes overwhelmed with the scope of events and the instinct is to settle back into the familiar comforting faith known and cultivated since the first moment one's lips found the nipple. The faith that someone else is dealing with it, that where the world becomes unknown to us, a powerful and benevolent human authority exists in which we only have to place our faith unconditionally in order to guarantee eternal emotional security. This dangerous delusion may be the central factor placing humanity's physical security and future in the hands of sociopaths. To anyone in the habit of dismissing people who are questioning, investigative and skeptical as tinfoil hat-wearing, paranoid, science-denying Trump supporters, the question is, what do you believe in? Where have you placed your faith and why? How is it that while no one trusts governments, you appear to trust nascent global governance organizations without question? How is this rational? If you are placing faith in such organizations, consider that in the modern global age, these organizations, as extraordinary well presented as they are simply grander manifestations of the local versions we know we cannot trust. They are not our parents and demonstrate no loyalty to humane values. There's no reason to place any faith whatsoever in any of them. If you haven't consciously developed a faith or questioned why you believe as you do to some depth, such a position might seem misanthropic, but in truth it is the opposite. These organizations have not earned your trust with anything other than PR money and glossy lies. True power remains, as ever, with the people. There's a reason why Buddhists strongly advise the placing of one's faith in the Dharma, or the natural law of life, rather than in persons, and that similar refrains are common in other belief systems. Power corrupts, and in the world today, misplaced and unfounded trust could well be one of the greatest sources of power there is. Massive criminal conspiracies exist. The evidence is overwhelming. The scope of these currently underway is unknown, but there's no reason to imagine in the new global age that the sociopathic quest for power or the possession of the resources required to move towards it is diminishing. Certainly not while dissent is mocked and censored into silence by gatekeepers, useful idiots, and conspiracy deniers who are, in fact, directly colluding with the sociopathic agenda through their unrelenting attack on those who would shine a light on wrongdoing. It is every humane being's urgent responsibility to expose sociopathic agendas wherever they exist, never to attack those who seek to do so. Now, more than ever, it is time to put away childish things and childish impulses, and to stand up as adults to protect the future of the actual children who have no choice but to trust us with their lives. This essay has focused on what I consider to be the deepest psychological driver of conspiracy denial. There are certainly others, such as the desire to be accepted, the avoidance of knowledge of and entanglement with the internal and external shadow, the preservation of a positive and righteous self-image, a generalized version of flying monkeys phenomenon in which a self-interested and vicious class protects themselves by coalescing around the bully, the subtle unconscious adoption of the sociopathic worldview, example given humanity is the virus, outrage addiction, superiority complex, status games, a stunted and unambitious intellect that finds validation through maintaining the status quo, the dissociative protective mechanism of imagining that crimes and horrors committed repeatedly within our lifetime are somehow not happening now, not here, and also plain old-fashioned laziness and cowardice. My suggestion is that to some degree all of these build on the foundation of the primary cause I have outlined here. For more on the topic of the so-called flying monkeys and their connection to the sociopath, check out these videos. I have a descripted and high production value video from TheraminTrees, or one of the other two gentlemen. So, if you want to make sure that your child grows up to be an independent adult, you should think of doing an adulthood initiation ritual at the right time. That ritual has two goals. First, show the child that it can survive without you, without its parents, if needed. I think outdoor camping is an excellent example, as it also taps into the deep-rooted, most primal human instincts. If you have other good ideas or examples suited for the current times, please write them in the comments. The second point is to lead your child to good universal values, values that are larger than any man, values of which you can directly show the benefit of, as well as the downside of not following such ideals. Now, back to the topic of the sociopath and their impact on society. A sociopath behaves like a wolf in sheep's clothing. It prefers to be surrounded by lots of real sheep, as that's what he preys upon, and not by other undercover wolves. But there's a human interaction also, and that breaks the analogy. People who have been harmed by sociopaths are more likely to show sociopathic traits themselves. So, over time in a society, the amount of sociopaths plus the second-hand sociopaths rises. This then means that more and more normal people are getting exposed to these type of negative behavior. This then leads us to where we are in the current year. Because of the rising levels of exposure, more and more people, voluntarily or not, are learning how to demask and deal with those wolves in sheep's clothing. The cover story of the sociopath is slowly falling apart. They get more and more exposed to what they truly are. But is it not too late now? Is not everything already lost? Analogy time. If sociopaths are like viruses, then the body will not react to them as long as they are a small minority and do not cause any danger. But as they multiply, the immune system starts to recognize them. An immune response is triggered, example giving fever. The question now is, will the patient survive? Will the virus take over? Or will the immune system gain the upper hand and manage to turn the body back to a new and better normal? In a way, this whole thing reminds me of this popular meme. Hard times make hard people lead to easy times create weaker people, who then in turn lead to harder times, completing the circle. But what if people were able to remember the lections from the hard times and hard-code the ideal solution to these problems in, let's say, customs, traditions, and universally applicable higher values? You see what I did here? And, as always, find your last path and take action. Vital Redpill out.